the fact is that the United States is pretty weak on all fronts, and it feels like the United States has pivoted back to the Middle East in large part because of its failures with regard to Ukraine, because I think it's probably a miscalculation here, and honestly, the timing is probably horrendous for Biden, but at the same time, there is no real avenue for any kind of foreign policy achievement when it comes to Asia or Ukraine. So the Middle East feels like this place where they want to put their energy into. But from what I'm seeing is that Israel, in effect, and this might be independent of the United States in some respect, although according to the Ayatollah in Iran, the U.S. is running this war too. But I do believe there's some independence here on the part of Israel, trying to take advantage of the U.S.'s weakness by going full scale ahead and doing what it's wanted to do for quite a while, which is to complete its process of expansion in Palestine. Because, as you know, Brian, Israel is not just interested in dominating the area, the nation of Palestine, but also going way beyond that. That's why it occupies the Golan Heights. That's why it has so many disputes with countries like Lebanon, even Egypt. It's because Jordan. It's because it has ambitions to continue expanding, and that's a huge deal for the United States. And I want to get your comment as I pull up RFK Jr. right now.
Sure, and you're absolutely right. Time is running out for Israel, just like it's running out for all U.S. proxies that are part of what the U.S. is attempting to do. People have to remember that Israel is not a monolithic state. There are many different political parties. There are people in Israel who believe in a two-state solution, and there's people in Palestine who believe in a two-state solution. There's people who support the Palestinian cause who believe in a two-state solution. So really, the goal here is to move these extremists out of the way so that rational people can sit down and agree to a two-state solution, which would benefit the best interests of everyone involved, the real best interests of everyone involved. Just like, say, in Ukraine, does it benefit the actual people of Ukraine and Ukraine as a viable nation state to continue fighting against Russia? Did it make any sense to begin this war in the first place? And the answer is obviously no. That is why the U.S. maneuvers and maintains irrational administrations in power in these proxy states, and Israel's no exception. So Netanyahu's administration is there precisely because it rejects a two-state solution and it refuses to sit down and make peace with anyone. It's like the Israeli Zelensky. Zelensky has changed the law, so it's impossible for him to negotiate with Russia. That is the ideal state the U.S. wants their proxies in. When you want to divide and conquer, having client regimes fully committed to perpetual chaos, that it's the ideal situation. But you're right, Israel cannot keep doing this forever. They have these ambitions beyond the borders that they have right now. It will never happen. It was already becoming increasingly unsustainable before all of this has happened. The whole move from unipolarism to multipolarism. What is actually driving that? It's not just people sitting down and agreeing to do this. It's because all of these nations are developing their industry, they're developing technology independent of the monopolies that the West had held for so many decades. So it is change on the ground, economically, militarily, in terms of infrastructure, that is driving all of these political developments. And it's going to continue no matter what the U.S. and the current administration in Israel does. They know it's inevitable. So that it almost seems like they're rushing, just like we always warned that they're going to rush regarding Taiwan. It's like they're rushing to eliminate the Palestinian people because they know a two-state solution is inevitable.
Yeah, and I truly do believe that Israel thinks, well, if we can get rid of all Palestinian people, the definition of a genocide, then it's a victory. Then they win. They're permanent. There's no possibility. In history, other empires and other colonial powers have tried to do this, where they say, if we can get rid of all the Africans in certain colonies, the French try to do this, the British try to do this, the English try to do this. If we can get rid of the Spanish, get rid of all of them, then we win. We can't be challenged anymore. But the world is a much different place. But here's RFK Jr., his latest comments on Israel. Of course, RFK Jr. has come under much fire for being a very Zionist in his political, positions regarding his election. He's received a lot of criticism of late, especially for those who are opposed to wars in the Middle East, opposed to the brutality against the Palestinian people. But here is RFK Jr. saying the quiet part out loud, but kind of unintentionally. He's just telling it how he sees it. He's giving Israel kind of a tongue bath here, saying Israel is so important. But I think he reveals kind of some fundamental facts that I definitely want you to comment on, Brian. So here we go.
And Israel is critical. And the reason it's critical is because it's a bulwark for us in the Mideast. It's almost like having an aircraft carrier in the Mideast. It's our oldest ally. It's been our ally for 75 years. It has been an incredible ally for us in terms of the technology, the exchange. And, in building the Iron Dome, which we paid a lot for, has also taught us enormously about how to defend ourselves at home for missiles. So those military expenditures are all going. 75% of it goes to U.S. companies under the agreement, under the MOU. But if you look at what's happening in the Mideast now, Iran is now the closest allies to Iran are Russia and China. Iran also controls all of Venezuela's oil. Hezbollah is in Venezuela. They have propped up the Maduro regime, and so they control that oil supply. BRICS, Saudi Arabia is now joining BRICS. So those countries will control 90% of the oil in the world. If Israel disappears, the vacuum in the Mideast, which is, Israel is our ambassador, it's our presence, our beachhead in the Mideast, and it gives us ears and eyes in the Mideast. It gives us intelligence, it gives us the capacity to influence affairs in the Mideast. If Israel disappeared, Russia and China would be controlling the Mideast, and they control 90% of the world's oil supply, and that would be cataclysmic for U.S. national security. So that's the answer to you.
So, I mean, what more can we say?
It's just unabashed imperialism. He's basically saying Israel is our colony in the Middle East. If we lose control of Israel, because all of our other so-called allies, captured states, they're pivoting away from us, then we'll just be out of luck. And just think about what he's saying. The United States on the other side of the planet will have no control over a region where it's not even located on a map. That's what he's saying. And so I always warn people, and you'll never see me do a whole video about U.S. elections because they're meaningless. All of the people involved are. It's just a show to keep people believing that they somehow have some role in determining what's going on. That is not how U.S. foreign and domestic policy is determined. It's not determined in the White House or in Congress. It's determined by these corporate-funded think tanks. The list of the corporations funding them are on their websites. You can go look at it right now. They have these policy papers written up. They're turned into bills. Certain parts of them are turned into bills by lawyers. They go to Washington with lobbyists. The lobbyists get it rubber stamped. Everyone in Washington doesn't even read it most of the time. And then the corporate media sells this policy to the American public to try to convince them that it's for their own good. And that's how it actually works. It doesn't matter who gets voted in as president or who's controlling Congress. We've watched this for as long as I've been paying close attention to this, from Bush Jr. all the way up until now. If you didn't tell me who the president was, I wouldn't even know that there had been a change in administration, because it is exactly the same foreign policy. It continues uninterrupted, continuity of agenda. And then all that we get from, say, the White House or from Congress is rhetoric, spin. It's explained to us in different ways. George Bush would explain to us why we're in all these wars. Obama would swear if you vote for him, he would end them. But then he would have his own excuse and spin as to why he was continuing and expanding all of these wars. So yes, people who are investing all of their hope in RFK or any candidate for that matter, that is, unfortunately, that is just hope, empty hope.
Yeah, and it's quite astounding to hear him talk about Israel playing this very particular function for the United States in this way, in a manner that's not unironic. I mean, he's actually just
As if it's a
saying
good
these
thing.
things
Yes.
yes, exactly, as if this is something that people want to hear. Now, of course, there are some people who want to hear this. I'm not even sure that his Israeli lobbyist donors really want to hear this, because it is a little bit too honest
Too much.
and maybe
yes.
even outside of their framework of how they think about things. Because honestly, I don't know how much the average Israeli lobbyist is thinking about BRICS Plus, for example. I think they're more so thinking about, how do I get U.S. politicians to do whatever Israel wants to do? How can we get them to do what Israel wants to do and rubber stamp everything that Israel does? That's generally what I think they think about. So it's astounding to hear him say, well, it's about being an unsinkable aircraft carrier. It's about ensuring that Israel plays, literally, he said, beachhead in the region, so that BRICS Plus countries, Iran, Russia, China, they can't they essentially have control over their own resources and develop independently of the United States. Meaning that what this seems to suggest is that the Palestinian people, what many people are calling genocide, ethnic cleansing, all of this very real horror happening. It means the Palestinian people are literally sacrifices for what is a global agenda. It is an imperial agenda. It's not simply Israel just wants to take all the land. It does want the land. It does want what's underneath Gaza. Gaza is very rich, has a lot of gas underneath there, but it is about, well, Palestinian people are kind of just in the way of this plan, and Israel has its own interests, but the United States will allow it. The United States could end it. A lot of people say this, and I always think to myself, okay, yes, theoretically, but in reality, this idea that the United States could stop Israel from doing what it's doing is kind of misguided, because the United States will let Israel do what it does as long as Israel is serving U.S. interests.
Absolutely. And let's just put it this way, because I see a lot of people always arguing somehow Israel, this country with this tiny GDP and relatively small military, somehow they've captured control of America, and all the horrible things that Washington does is against their will. The Jews are making them do it. Otherwise they would want to have peace and let the people in the Middle East have their freedom and their independence. It doesn't work that way. And I just want to point something out, and maybe a little mental exercise here. Just look at how insane everything became in 2022 regarding Ukraine. Just remember how the media was covering it and portraying it, the political system, all of these people falling over themselves to get to Kiev and pose with President Vladimir Zelensky. And they were thinking about changing laws, and the social media platforms were booting people for even questioning Ukraine, and the things that they're doing are just pointing out simple facts. People were going to jail for that, literally going to jail for that. And look at all the money that was being sent to Ukraine, and look at all of the impunity that the U.S. lent and the EU lent Ukraine, and all of the things that they had been doing. Not just from 2022 onward, but from 2014 onward. We talk about Gaza. The client regime in Kiev had the same sort of obsession with the Donbas region, also Crimea to a certain extent. It's not a perfect analogy. They had this obsession with the territory, and just like you say, Danny, that serves U.S. interests, because they were trying to bait Russia into a conflict, and that's how they were doing it. They don't care about, the U.S. doesn't care about the Donbas region, who controls it. They couldn't care less. And they don't care about Gaza or the West Bank or any of the other territories the Israelis are occupying. All they care about is their ability to use that as a pretext and as a provocation. That is how they use Israel. That is how they've used Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and that is how they've used Hamas. And I just want to kind of talk about something you mentioned before, Danny. Hamas is also not a monolithic organization, has many different factions, and you're absolutely right. From their 1988 charter to 2017, when they revised it, it was quite a change. And it's signified that at least some people in Hamas were thinking about pivoting, just as I explained. Iran, Syria, Russia, China wanted them to pivot. That is a process that is taking place, but there's still obviously factions that were not on board for it. So we have to keep all of this in mind. It's not really that cut and dry. It's not black and white. We have to keep in mind all of this. We have to zoom out. A lot of people get obsessed with the minutia of everything that's happening between Israel and Palestine. You have to zoom out and see it in the larger context. And when you look at Ukraine and you see how the U.S. its relationship works with Ukraine, and then how its relationship works with Israel, it's very similar. So, I mean, is the U.S. sending all of these weapons and money and granting Ukraine impunity because the Ukraine lobby controls Washington and controls the media? No, it serves U.S. interests, just like you said, Danny.
Yeah, and maybe to close on the Palestine topic, I mean, my position has been on this issue because it's both, I feel like I've been following this for many, many, many years before I got into even media, even when I was just, an activist out there finding out about what was going on in Palestine. And, on the one hand, right, I think it's important that people are highlighting the horror that's happening to the Palestinian people. I do think social media does get a little rough when it comes to the all over and over and over again the stories, but I get why people do it, is because they're trying to push the reality that people are suffering, and I mean untold suffering, like just intense amounts of suffering that is unimaginable to most people around the world. Right, we're talking about 160 children killed per day. That's in a very densely populated area. It's a nightmare. It's a massacre. And at the same time, this conflict, like the Palestinian people, they have the right to resist. They will continue to resist. Pretty confident in that. When Palestinians have done peaceful resistance, we saw the March of Return not too long ago. It was just, what was that, 4 or 5 years ago? The March to Return, children are being shot at even during peaceful protests. So we know that Palestinians exercise all kinds of ways of protesting. And at the same time, I believe that the only way this conflict is ever going to be resolved is regionally. I don't know how that's going to happen. On the one hand, it's very possible. It's happened before many, many, many times. At least a couple of times it's already happened, where there have been many, Arab countries, countries in the region feeling like they have to go to war with Israel to resolve this problem. Not sure if that's going to happen now. Not sure if that's going to happen in the future, but it certainly is a possibility. Also, it could be maybe peaceful in the sense that these countries come together and there's just such an overwhelming force where Israel is isolated to a certain extent. But I think what's very important is that the United States is the one that is making that possibility basically a non-starter, because there is no negotiation. Israel, of course, is not even looking at a ceasefire, but we're talking about the United States pushing war in this way, and there's no other alternative. There's not even the uttering of a ceasefire, because the United States is so committed to war. So I think that regardless of how it happens, when the Palestinian people finally get their self-determination, finally get their justice, it's going to be a regional, if not a global phenomenon, similar to what happened in South Africa, similar to what happened in other parts of the world that have fought similar kinds of conflicts, anti-colonial conflicts. It hardly ever is just the people themselves, or just throw off the yoke. It didn't happen in Vietnam, got a lot of help. I was just there. Vietnam had a lot of help. A lot of help globally. Russia, Soviet Union at the time, China, Cuba, more help, a lot of help. Without that help, I don't think Vietnam would have been able to win. So it'll probably be similar with regard to Palestine. And it's a different moment now than in those periods. So it's going to be interesting to see where things go forward. But anyway, any closing thoughts on the Palestine before we move on?
Yes, well, I just want to add, I think that it's going to unfold as it had been before October 7th. The region is going to avoid escalation. Hezbollah's committed to not being pulled into this trap. The U.S. wants conflict. They want to destroy the region like they're destroying Europe. This is how they see themselves maintaining control and influence over the region. And the region is going to do everything in their power to avoid this. And Israel's going out of their way to be as atrocious as possible, because this is an attempt to provoke the region into war. And we see all of the protests breaking out across the Arab and Muslim world. And they are doing this to deliberately put pressure on these governments, to force them into a course of action that they don't want to take. The situation with Israel, they said this for years, and people never believed that it was possible, that eventually Israel would pivot toward multipolarism. They would eventually have to, if they wanted to continue to exist. And we saw them in a process toward that. And again, it's the extremists that are in power right now. Who's empowering them, though? How is Netanyahu's administration in power, and why do they continue to stay in power? The United States. And you see Russia and China fully understand that the U.S. is the source of this problem. It's not in Israel. It is in the United States. They are empowering Israel. And if you can diminish America's presence and influence in the region, you're going to diminish this control and influence they have over Israel and every other country in the region. So that's what they're working on. That's what they will continue to work on. I know it's not what people want to hear, but it's going to be a very long process, a very hard process. We're watching Israel trying to erase northern Gaza basically off the map. And that is very hard to watch. People have to remember, though, you have to look at the big picture. If you escalate this conflict into a wider war, all of that death and destruction is going to spread. It's going to involve millions of people. And the region wants to avoid that. And just look at Russia and their intervention in Syria. Turkey shot down one of their jets. I remember at the time people were saying Putin's a coward. He won't retaliate. He should bomb Ankara. But that patience has paid off, and Russia is in a better position now because of that strategic patience and that ability to look into the future and think several steps ahead. And so the immediate reaction that seems the most obvious is often the worst type of decision to make. It's usually going to put you somewhere you don't want to be rather than put you on the path where you need to go. So this persistent patience, both Russia and China have exhibited for decades, really, when you look at it, and it is paying off. But ordinary people, that's not the answer. They want to see this, and understandably so. They want to see it stop now. So what can ordinary people, or people like you and I, Danny, what can we do? We can just continue highlighting the horrors that Israel is inflicting and remind people that this is being enabled entirely by the United States. So all the U.S., if they wanted to stop, all they have to do is stop sending the bombs, because these are U.S. bombs that they're dropping. This U.S. military hardware that they're using, their military-industrial complex, Israel's military-industrial complex, could not sustain any sort of operation like this. And Netanyahu's administration couldn't remain in power without the support it gets from the United States. It's just like Zelensky in Ukraine. Everything that Ukraine has been doing since 2014 has been enabled by the West. It could not have done it any other way.
Yeah, we didn't even get to talk about how Russia and China at the United Nations Security Council standing alone, calling for a genuine ceasefire that legitimizes not just the fact that Palestinian people need things like the right to breathe and to have food and water and things like this, but also recognizes what you brought up earlier, which is the right to a Palestinian state, justice for Palestinians, not just Israel's security interests, which of course Russia and China, given that they are diplomatic masters at this point, they recognize, regardless of whatever personal opinions anyone has, they recognize Israel as a country that has, recognized by the United Nations. So you have to recognize their security interests, so to speak. But at the same time, you can't just drop the Palestinian question. You can't drop the international law, the UN resolutions that exist regarding Palestine, and Russia and China have upheld that. Russia went so far as to say, their UN envoy went so as far to say that Israel doesn't have a right to defend itself in this situation. What it's doing is not self-defense, which is 100% correct.
Yes.
And the U.S., as you said, Brian, is the problem here, because it's like, it's the bombs, it's the funding, it's the arming, it's basically
the media
allowing Israel to do them.
Yes.
Yeah, the media, the political cover, the propaganda war. And then, of course, even at this level, right, it's the United States that is sitting on the UN Security Council, giving a nudge to its European friends and saying, hey, vote with us. We're going to veto any kind of legitimate ceasefire. And then we'll throw in these garbage proposals, which no one is ever going to accept on the other side, like, a couple hours pause while Israel gets the right to defend itself. And, it can just, so this is the reality that we live in. And it's going to take, I think you're exactly right. There's a reason why Iran, Hezbollah, we heard Nasrallah's speech. They are in solidarity with Palestine. Hezbollah is doing something regarding this issue. They are fighting they have to fight on the border, first of all, because Israel has basically opened up a front there. But
yes,
they are also doing it because they understand how important it is to not just defend themselves, but to allow Palestine some breathing room, allow Gaza some breathing room by taking, it was right in Nasrallah's speech. He said, we're doing this in part because we know how important it is. So Iran, Hezbollah, Syria, these countries stand in solidarity with Palestine, but it's a very complicated situation. They can't go in. Syria cannot go into war. Iran certainly cannot just go into a war without running the risk of destroying any kind of stability in the region. And it sounds really hard in terms of making those kind of choices, but the reality is that the problem lies with the United States, because the United States has caused all of these problems. It should not be an issue, right? Iran shouldn't have to worry about sanctions. Syria shouldn't have to worry about sanctions. They shouldn't have to worry about a nuclear war starting just because they're defending the legitimate rights of the people in that region. But that's the position we're in.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.